Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay O'Neill, and I teach history here at USC. And my goal today is to, one, introduce you to some of the items that are held in USC's special collections, to put some of those items into historical context, and to challenge you to recreate some of the recipes that we found within these manuscripts. And particularly today, I want to focus on one manuscript, this one, which is a book of receipts or recipes from around the end of the 18th, perhaps the early 19th century. Now, if you open this book, you will see that it is a handwritten list of a bunch of different recipes that a woman transcribed during this period. And many of them are things you'd expect, right? We have orange pudding, we have lemon cheesecakes, we have whipped cream, gooseberries to bottle, a medical receipt or a medical cure. But this one up here is extra interesting. So this one is a recipe for India pickle. So in some ways, not surprising. British people have been pickling things for many years, but the ingredients in here are unique and point to Britain's expansion as an imperial power during the 18th and during the 19th centuries. So if we read through this, we find that it calls for ginger from Southeast Asia, similarly turmeric, long pepper, which is a specific kind of pepper from Asia that is different from, but close to in some ways, our traditional kind of black peppercorn. And it also has Jamaica pepper, which is particularly interesting because these aren't just ingredients from Southeast Asia, from the Indian subcontinent, but also from the other side of Britain's imperial power, from the West Indies. So it's kind of a mix of these different imperial influences on what is in some ways a very British dish. Now let's put this into historical context here for you. So this is a map of the British Empire in 1815. So a little bit after the time we would probably date that recipe. And the two main power players for the British are going to be the West Indies and the Indian subcontinent. These are where the majority of the profits from the empire originate. So let's dig in a little bit of what's happening in these places. So if we look into the West Indies. So the West Indies had been colonized by the British since the 17th century. And the majority of the wealth emanating from that area is from sugar plantations. And sugar plantations mean that this was an area dominated by enslaved labor of Africans who have been brought there against their will. This was a period, the end of the 18th century, when we do see the rise of a push for abolitionism, first of the slave trade and then of slavery itself, slave trade being abolished in 1807, slavery in 1833. But during the time the recipe was written, this was still a place where sugar and rich sugar plantations dominated, as did enslaved labor. And a number of those rich planters would go back to England and became very powerful lobbyists, but they also brought home with them not only enslaved Africans, who we see kind of surfacing in newspaper articles about who had escaped their masters, so we can see some forms of resistance there, here and there, but they also brought with them some of their foodways and ingredients from the West Indies. What about the Indian subcontinent? So the timeline here is slightly similar. So the British have been in the Indian subcontinent since around 1600, when the East India Company was founded. Although it takes a long time for the East India Company to become a powerful entity within the Indian subcontinent, which was dominated by the Mughal Empire for much of its early existence. Starting in the mid-18th century, however, the power of the Mughal Empire falters, and the different polities, including the East India Company, fight for dominance of the different polities in the area. And by this period, the East India Company is becoming a territorial power. Thus becoming more powerful in general in the Indian subcontinent. And many of the British who go to India end up eating the food of the subcontinent and bringing a lot of those tastes home. Because the way that they would eat when they were in the Indian subcontinent was often not dissimilar from the way many native Indians would kind of consume food as well, because their cooks are usually going to be people of the subcontinent. So this is a picture from a book called The European in India from 1813. And it shows a meal of these British men and women who are in India at the time. And you can see that they're being served by Indian servants. And as I said, their cooks were probably Indian. And often they were serving what was similar to the food of India. They tweaked it often for British tastes, making it less spicy, in some ways making it less complex. And the British would take this taste for this kind of food home with them. And they would also take sometimes with them their cooks and servants. So you do have this, this transition of food that was mainly consumed in India being taken back to England as well. And we begin to see recipes for things like curry showing up in cookbooks in England. So this is the first instance of curry showing up in a British cookbook. This is Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery from 1747. And this is how to make curry the India way. Now, if you read this and you know anything about India food, you know this is not making curry the India way. In fact, there isn't an India way to make curry because there's many different kinds of curries in the many different regions of the subcontinent. But this is how the British conceptualize things like curry. It usually has coriander, some other spices, a lot of butter. It's kind of a sauce. And this became known to them as curry. So in some ways, curry is the British national dish because there is no one single curry that you're going to find in the Indian subcontinent. And we begin to see this kind of interest in reliance on these kind of imperial foods showing up in other items that we have in special collections. So this is another item that you could call up in special collections. It's a catalog of Indian condiments that you could buy from this company, which is located in the Oriental Depot, which is, you know, interesting from an imperial angle, which is near Leicester Square, right in the center of London, and that they're getting their ingredients from Calcutta. And we believe this was produced around 1896. Now, if we open this, we can see their pride in having access to these different goods. So it reads that, you know, we are still make a specialty of all kinds of Indian condiments, and having a new and enlarged factory in Calcutta, our supplies of curry powders and paste, chutneys, et cetera, are constantly coming forward and are in consequence as fresh as it is possible to obtain them out of India. So there is this growing British taste for curry paste, curry powders, chutneys, these things that they had experienced abroad and that we're finding a wider audience in England. And if we turn the pages, we can see evidence of this, right? So here's the list of the different chutneys that you could buy, you know, Lucknow sweet, Madras, Kashmir, right? Some with more Anglicanized titles, Colonel Skinner's, Major Gray's, Bengal Club, right? But so you can see this kind of draw of different kind of chutneys made with mangoes, these very kind of, in the British minds, exotic fruits. And we can see on the second page here towards the bottom, curry pastes and curry powders. The British are the first to use a curry paste or a curry powder in this way. People who are making, you know, what we would think of as curries in India wouldn't just toss in curry powder. They would have different spices that they would add at different times. So the creation of a curry powder is a very British thing, you know, usually creating a less kind of complex palette for the dish. But you can see that there were multiple kinds of curry powder and curry paste that people could buy, mild Madras, you know, Calcutta hot, these sorts of things. So you can see that growing taste for these goods from the empire. And here we can also see how they might have gotten a hold of that ginger that's mentioned in the India pickle recipe. So here you could see that they can buy China preserved ginger, crystallized, glacé. What I also find interesting here is you can also buy West India preserved ginger, which sounds like that they had transported ginger from Southeast Asia to the West Indies to grow it there. So this movement of goods throughout the empire. I also think it's fun to note that some of the honey comes not only from the West Indies, but also from California. All right, if we turn to another page, we can see that you could also buy pickles from these sorts of stores that the British had gotten used to during their time there. And these were not kind of your normal forms of British pickles. These are made of things like mangoes, limes, bamboo, right? So not your normal kind of cucumbers, carrots, green beans. And so you can see that influence here. Also, again, you see the mix of West and East Indies. We have West India pickles as well, gherkins, hot sauce, hot peppers, etc., kind of throughout here. So you can see how these different foods from the different parts of the empire are beginning to kind of mix and mingle in catalogs like this. So let's go back to our India pickle. And this is the recipe we want to challenge you to make. We're going to offer the more advanced challenge, which is to recreate this recipe just from the original wording. Or we'll give you a much more modernized and kind of shrunken recipe. This makes a lot. So if you'd like to follow the easier recipe, you can do that. But the last thing I want to kind of note here is how this recipe changed from the kind of pickles that you might get in India to the kind you might produce in England. So usually in India, when you were creating pickles or pickling or fermenting something, you'd use oil and water rather than vinegar, and you would use the sun to heat it. It's Britain, there's not a lot of sun, so that's why the British depend on vinegar rather than the kind of more accepted form in India. In India, they're going to depend more on chili and chili peppers, although those have an interesting history in and of themselves. Many chili peppers actually were introduced by the Portuguese, who were introduced to them by their colonies in the Americas. But the British often substitute these spicier flavors with things like mustard, a very kind of British ingredient. And finally, the Indians are usually pickling things, as you saw from their condiment catalog, like mango and bamboo shoots. Not a lot of mangoes, not a lot of bamboo shoots in Britain. So they're usually going to pickle things like tomatoes, which was their closest equivalent to a mango, which interestingly is an American item as well. Things like elder shoots, cucumbers, etc. In fact, this recipe says you can pickle whatever you want, but not walnuts. I have no idea why you can't pickle walnuts. So when you're recreating this dish, what you're recreating is how the British kind of brought in these different kind of experiences from the empire and helped it influence their kind of culinary experience. So good luck with this recipe, Godspeed, and I look forward to hearing how people's experiments went. Hi all, I also have a couple of pertinent details to share. So first, where to find the original and the modernized recipe. So those can be found in multiple places depending on how you came to this video. We will post a link to a Google Drive with both forms, both on the link below the YouTube clip, on a link on the Instagram post, or on a link of the email that you received with links to this video. So just follow the links to find the original and the modernized recipes through a Google Drive. Also, if you'd like to share your experience with pickling with us and hear how everyone else's experiences went, we'll be holding a Zoom session on this experience on Monday, April 26th at noon. If you would like to join us, you just need to RSVP, and there will be a link under the recipe links on all the above locations. So please pickle along and join us in a discussion about the experience on Monday, April 26th at noon. And finally, if you'd like to follow others' pickling experiences, people will be posting about their process on Instagram in many different forms. So you can follow us and watch for us on Instagram and Twitter at USC Speckle or Special Collections and USC Dornsife, so you can watch out for posts there. And you can use the hashtag pickle along to watch for posts or to post your own experience. So please join us, and we look forward to hearing about everyone's pickling experiences.